Hi, I'm Mark. This is Mark's Tech Vlogs on YouTube, and today I'm going to bring you guys a review of the Switchbot Universal Remote. Now, this remote came out about 2 months ago, and I've been using it for about a month and trying to put it through its paces. And so this is going to be my take on the first universal remote control from Switchbot. And let's kick off with price. Now, if you buy this on its own, it's going to cost you $59.99. Now, there's quite regularly 10% off voucher codes for Switchbot, including one that I've got below. That means realistically, you're probably going to pay about £50 to £55 for it. It's worth noting, however, that you are going to need a hub. That means you're either going to need Switchbot's Hub 2, which is about £79, or Switchbot's Hub Mini with Matter support. You can, however, get a bundle that includes a Hub Mini with Matter support and the remote, and that costs just £99. This still puts it a lot cheaper than other similar devices out there. And I suspect most people who pick one of these up are already going to have Switchbot devices, so probably won't need the hub. But this still makes it a really affordable option, even if you do need one. And like I said, there is a voucher code below where you can save £10, which will bring that £99 down to about £90. In the box, you get the remote itself, a USB-C cable for charging, and some instructions. You also get a kind of SIM release tool, which is used for using a reset button on the bottom of the device if you need to. So let's talk about the design. And this remote breaks away from your traditional black remote control and comes in white. This, of course, is a colour Switchbot use for a lot of their products, and I really like that they've gone for a different colour with this rather than just going with black. And that's mostly because it just looks super modern. It has a red Switchbot button on the device which acts as a sort of home or back button, and then it's got some of the most commonly used buttons on the remote as physical buttons. It also has a wheel at the top which you can click the 4 edges to act as arrow buttons, but you can also whirl your finger around it a bit like an iPod Classic. It has a confirm button in the middle. And then at the top there's a screen which is plenty bright enough, and this is used for triggering some actions and also going through some of the menus. The bottom of that screen also has 4 action buttons which change depending on the device that you're controlling. All in all, whilst this isn't the slimmest remote ever, it's reasonably slim, but one thing you do notice is how light it is. And personally, I think the design of this is fantastic. So let's talk specification. So that rechargeable battery built in can last for up to 150 days based on 5 minutes of use a day. Now, in using this for a month, I'd say that's probably going to be about right, although I'm expecting to get more out of it. And that's because typically with Switchbot devices, I tend to find what they say for battery life is never what actually happens, and you always get a little bit extra, which is great. Now, this remote does work with your traditional things like televisions and DVD players, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but it also works with a variety of Switchbot devices. At the time of recording, that includes their box, their curtains, their blind tilts, their smart plugs, their colour bulbs, their LED strips, and their K10 Plus vacuum. What you can control with this remote for each of those devices varies depending on the device. It also works with some third-party services, and this is thanks to the built-in Bluetooth. This means it can currently control your Apple TV or your Fire TV. Switchbot have said that in the future, Roku, Android TV, and Nvidia support TV is coming. You can also set up basically any existing infrared remote, and that is thanks to the Switchbot Hub and its power to learn controls. Now, for common devices like Samsung TVs, you're going to find all the remotes pre-programmed in the app. You just have to find the device you want. But even if you've got an obscure make of aircon or DVD player, you can program every single individual remote using the hub. One of the really nice things is that if you already have some remotes set up using one of those Switchbot hubs and the app already, you can just import them straight into the remote. And then you're also able to add Switchbot scenes into this remote as well, which is great for triggering a bunch of your Switchbot devices together. Maybe closing all of your blinds. And then finally for spec, we should talk about Matter, because Switchbot say this is the first remote control with Matter support. And really at the moment that is something that is only really useful for Apple users. Which is great because I tend to focus a lot on Apple compatible devices and I use a lot of Apple products. What this means is that for Apple Home users, you can add the remote into your Apple Home and then assign 4 devices or scenes to those top 4 buttons. This basically means this remote can control non-Switchbot, non-Bluetooth devices in your Apple Home. And that could be anything from toggling a scene that controls a whole variety of things in your home to locking your front door. In my opinion, this is really groundbreaking and incredibly useful. And then of course it supports a lot of the usual things for remote controls, so things like a raise to wake function to save battery life on the screen. And it also has a function where it can make a noise if you lose it. This is triggered by the app. So let's talk about setting it up. And as with every Switchbot product I've ever set up is really easy. You just head into the Switchbot app, set an account if you don't already have one, and then hit the plus at the top. You'll then find the universal remote and follow the instructions on screen for setting it up. The chances are there's going to be a firmware update at this time as well, and I do find that firmware updates for remote do take a little bit longer than some other Switchbot devices. If you have infrared remotes already set up in your Switchbot home, you can easily import them straight into the remote. You can also choose which Switchbot devices you want to add as well, and you can reorder the order of those on that screen as well via the app. If you're an Apple user, you're also going to want to add it into whichever Switchbot hub you have as a Matter device. You do this by going into the Switchbot hub, going into the settings and adding this as a Matter device. This will then automatically appear in your Apple Home app after a minute or so. You can then jump into the Apple Home app and assign those 4 buttons to whatever you want. This can literally be anything from a scene that triggers a variety of devices or just single devices in your Apple Home. This means you could lock your front door with this remote, or feed your pets, or trigger a scene that sets your lounge to nice lighting and closes your blinds. You can also do things at this point like pair your Apple TV remote to the remote back in the Switchbot app. And then you can also add Switchbot scenes if you want to. For example, I have a morning and evening scene. The morning one opens all my blinds and curtains, the evening one closes them, and I can toggle that from remote if I want to. And this diversity of things you can do with this remote make it the smartest remote that I've ever used. And so let's talk about using it, because I have been using this for about a month. And this has been the only remote I've used when I haven't been using my phone. So firstly, when you raise to wake it, it responds pretty quickly and that screen lights up. You can then select the device you want to use from that list, or it will remember the previously used one. You then control the device using those buttons. As I said, it's got some buttons built onto it for common actions. These are on, off, back, home, channel up and down, mute and volume up and down. That Switchbot button acts as a kind of back for the screen at the top. That wheel can behave as arrows with an OK button in the middle, but you can also move your finger around it like a click wheel on the Apple iPod Classic. Personally, I found this is the best way to circle through the devices on that top screen. And generally, all of these buttons are a pretty good size, they're really responsive, and they're really clicky. Kind of everything you want from a remote. And I think that wheel works really well as a way of quickly browsing through the devices on your list. Now, I've been using this a lot with my TV and my Apple TV, and I've just found that it works really well. And a lot of the time, I find it's much easier just to grab this than having to grab my phone and load in an app. Now, it's probably worth saying at this point that I pretty much just use my Apple TV for everything. That means buttons like source I generally don't need. However, those 4 action buttons at the bottom of the screen can be assigned to different buttons on your remote. So if source was a button you use regularly, you could set it as one of those. By default for TV remotes, there's a quick button here for the number keys. And really, I think this is all pretty well thought out. The second functionality we should talk about is the ability to control your Switchbot devices. And this kind of depends on which Switchbot device you've got, and going into the app and looking at the device will tell you which buttons do which. You can also personalise these a little, and this is especially true for things like blinds and curtains. What I've generally found is the blind and curtain options are great, especially if you want to perhaps put your blinds up rather than down when the sun's shining in. You can easily do this on the remote. What I will say is I think the K10 Plus features are a little limited at the moment, and the only things it can currently do is on and off, which means start cleaning and stop cleaning and go home. It'd be nice to see some other things improved in the future, maybe having the option to adjust suction power. And thirdly, as I said, it's Matter enabled, which at the moment only really works for Apple users. I am, however, an Apple user, and this is super cool. So with the Matter connectivity, you've got a choice of 4 buttons which are at the top under the screen. You can assign what these buttons do in the Apple Home app. And as I said, these can be single devices in your Apple Home app or whole scenes. You can then go back to the Switchbot app and rename the text that appears for each of these. This means you'll easily be able to remember what you set them to. So I've got one for my cozy lounge scene which closes my blinds and puts some lights on. I've got one which operates my Alexa smart pet feeder. I've got one which turns all of my lights off. And then I've got one which turns on my Mirror smart plugs which are hooked up with my record player and speakers ready for me to listen to music. I've also then got the remote for those speakers programmed on the remote. And this Apple Home integration is super cool and gives you kind of infinite possibilities of what you can do with this remote. And then finally, that Find Remote option in the Switchbot app, which lights up the remote and emits a noise, is great when you can't find the remote. Especially when you know it's gone down the side of a sofa somewhere, but you don't know where. And in using this remote, I found that the infrared and the Bluetooth are really responsive and everything just works really well. But what are the downsides? Firstly, that Matter support is only available for Apple users. Now, I don't know if this is going to come to Amazon and Google in the future, because I believe this is due to the way Amazon and Google work at the moment. But for an Apple user like myself, this is really cool. And especially cool if you've got people who perhaps aren't so techie around your house, but you've got things you want them to be able to operate. And then secondly, when you do use this remote, if you haven't done the raise to wake, your first button click effectively wakes up the device and you then have to repeat the process. That means if it's just on your table and you want to hit volume up without picking it up, you actually need to press volume up twice for it to kick in and leave a little gap between the first press and the second press for it to wake up. This is obviously great for conserving battery life, but can be a little bit irritating. And then thirdly, it's also worth pointing out that I know some people really don't like remotes with rechargeable batteries. And I guess that's because it's really easy just to grab batteries and put them in your old remote. But in my opinion, the length of battery life on this Switchbot one is great. And because it's USB-C, you can easily just plug it in with whatever charger you use for your phone. And because I have one of these kind of next to the sofa, I can easily plug it in and still use the remote if I do want to charge it. So I don't think this is a problem at all, and of course it's much better for the environment rather than using disposable batteries all the time. So those are the downsides, but all in all, what's the verdict on this first universal remote from Switchbot? And really, with the ability to set up any remote you want thanks to the Switchbot Hub's ability to learn remote commands, the option to add existing Switchbot devices, and its compatibility with things like Apple TVs and the ability through Matter to control anything in your Apple Home, this is easily the best smart remote control if you're an Apple user. And if you've already got a Switchbot Hub 2 or a Switchbot Hub Mini with Matter, then at £60 it is incredibly good value. For Android users, I think it's a bit more of a debate about what you actually use in your home. If you've got a lot of Switchbot devices and infrared remotes, then it is certainly worth looking at, although if you use Android TV, you might want to hold off until support for that comes. I hope you guys found this review helpful. If you've got any questions, do stick them below and I'll answer those for you. This is going to be the remote that I use every day on an ongoing basis from now on because it is so good. If you do want to pick one up, I've put links below to Amazon and Switchbot, which will go to those sites in whichever country you're in. There's also a voucher code below where you can save 10% if you buy it via the official Switchbot website. It's always worth checking both Switchbot and Amazon because prices do vary, and sometimes Amazon is cheaper even with that voucher code. They are affiliate links, so if you use them, I will get a very small amount of what you spend, and that just helps this channel out because I don't get paid to make these videos, I don't take sponsorships, I just make videos that I think are really useful for you guys. So if you use one of those links, thank you. If you've got any questions, do stick them below and I'll answer those. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys again soon.